Mr. Thompson, thank you very much for joining us here today. I want to start with your experience in Meta and how it shaped your career. You worked in Meta before in Libra Diane project. How did it shape your vision at the Sui Foundation?
Yeah, it's a good question. My time at Meta was amazing, honestly. The idea that you're serving, 3.5 billion people a day is pretty remarkable when it comes to scale. You definitely learn how to do things at a scale and understand impact of decisions in a way that's probably not possible in too many other places in the world. So from that perspective, it was a remarkable experience, and I feel honestly very blessed to have been part of that team for as long as I was. Particularly on the Libra project, the vision around that project was also quite remarkable. The idea of bringing, financial services to the 2.5 or 3 billion people on the earth who are not banked. They're just completely out of the financial markets of one kind or another, banking markets, very basic things. Was an effort that ultimately should still happen. These are people that basically just don't have access to basic things as a result of not being able to identify themselves. And so that project, I think, was great. And how it impacts sort of our work at Sui is that we built there at Facebook a language called Move, a programming language. The reason that we built that at the time was that there was not programming language available in Web3 that could support 3.5 billion people a day. And so we had to create our own. And so that was yet another piece of this experience. It was great that you're creating net new infrastructure for the next version of the internet and build it in a way where you can truly accommodate the scale of the earth. I mean, when you think about it, you're talking about 8 billion people. I think it's hard for most people to sort of imagine what that means. And so this particular team was the team that brought that to life. One of our founders, Sam Blackshear, was the creator of Move. So I'm surrounded constantly by absolutely remarkable people. And so from that perspective, it's one of the things that lasts beyond Meta at Sui.
In your view, what are the biggest current risks in blockchain security?
It's a good question. The risks in blockchain are very similar to the risks that exist in other spheres of one kind or another. The idea of identity protection, these kinds of things are the same kinds of risks that exist in blockchain that exist in other Web 2 sorts of spheres, or even outside of Web 2. People, of course, have to just be mindful of their surroundings and what information they're giving out and that kind of thing. We've been very cautious to build in security into the protocol. So we've never been hacked. We've never fortunately fallen over as far as the infrastructure goes. And it is because many of our founders, of course myself included as a former CISO, we bake security into the core infrastructure.
How does Sui Foundation strike a balance between decentralization and regulatory compliance?
Yeah, Sui in particular, of course, is a permissionless chain. It's not owned by anyone. It's not owned by the foundation. It is permissionless. And so from that perspective, the foundation isn't really regulated because it doesn't own it. It's literally just the keeper of the treasury, and its mission is to build the ecosystem. the members of the community will certainly build in capability to jump through whatever regulation various governments put up. I think that regulatory clarity ultimately is important.
I want to focus on the differences. What sets Sui apart from other layer one blockchain projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. Ultimately, it is this, is that you can't build the next version of the internet, Web 3. We've been in Web 2 for greater than 2 decades. Building in Web 3 in a meaningful way requires a full developer stack. So Sui is just the coordination layer. As you can imagine, we're at the precipice of the convergence of several kinds of technologies. If you look at artificial intelligence, you look at augmented or virtual reality, you look at robotics, you look at some kind of quantum, right? These technologies are converging. As an example, to allow AI to act on your behalf, to do even the most remedial things like make a trade on your behalf or book a doctor's appointment. It needs to be able to validate who you are, right?
Yeah.
It needs to be able to access your financial account. It needs to be able to validate that you have the money in place or the insurance in place. This coordination is very complex to coordinate all these pieces and parts. And so Sui is the perfect coordination layer for that, but that isn't where it begins and ends. You've got to have things like storage. You've got to have things like access control. Like you don't want me having access to your personal information, right? And so this is the idea behind a full developer stack. So if you ask me what the differentiator is between Sui and every other sort of chain that's out there, is that it isn't just about the chain. It's about all of the other primitives that create a full developer stack, that create speed, that create efficiency, that create the ability to scale, that create security, and give developers all of the tools they need to be able to be fully creative and build to scale. And when I'm talking about scale, it was our earlier conversation, 8 billion people.
Yeah. What innovations does Sui offer in terms of scalability and user experience?
Yeah, the way that the technology is built is infinitely scalable. So that's just baked into the infrastructure. Again, we all came from a place where you're serving 3.5 billion people. And so it is purpose built for this scale. The way that we execute transactions is parallelized. And so it creates a capability that allows infinite amount of throughput.
Now I want to focus on your personal life.
Okay.
From homicide detective to SWAT commander to tech executive, what has been the most transformative moment in your career? How all of these shaped and became the person you are today?
Yeah. I've never been asked that before. Yeah, I would say that every sort of chapter in my life has had its own sort of interesting inflection moments. If you're talking about my time as a police officer, I think it's an amazing opportunity to serve. I got to see amazing people, amazing acts of heroism, and then also pure evil and sort of everything in between. And I think you also, in walking away from it, you walk away with an empathy for people, that the journey for people, everybody's life's journey is hard. It's not easy life. And so I think when you're exposed to that kind of thing, you go two ways. You either get very hard and rigid, or you become softer. And that is the thing that happened to me, is I became softer. And I think, have just more empathy for people in their own journeys, for sure.
What leadership lessons did you carry over from your time in law enforcement?
Yeah, great question. I think it is empowering people. You've got to be able to expose people to the resources that they have available to them, and then encourage them to use those resources according to certain principles. These are the things I think that empower people to become the best version of themselves. So that's part of it. I would say that Facebook actually was a part of it as well. Facebook's whole mantra is really about empowering and hiring people that are better than you, and allowing them to teach you, not the other way around. So we really focus on supporting our staff, not managing them.
I get it. As someone who's led both security and executive teams, how do you define effective leadership in a tech company?
Yeah, I think there's a business side of it that really just comes down to execution, right? You've got to be executing on your goals and on the plan that you have in front of you. Again, though, success really comes down again to the people. It comes down to their happiness. It comes down to giving them opportunity. It comes down to, watching people fly and spread their wings and being very successful. You can see it in their faces, I think, ultimately, when they're happy doing what they're doing.
What's your take on the growing trend of crypto regulations worldwide?
Well, I'm super excited of where we are there. We've started to get some regulatory clarity in the United States. Of course, the United States acts as an interesting sort of, kingpin in so many ways in the financial markets. So I'm encouraged that we're getting financial clarity and stable coins and some other pieces. I'm just grateful that it's happening. It's definitely going to be a watershed moment once we get a lot of regulatory clarity. It'll open up the world in many ways to many opportunities, for sure. If we're all skating to the puck, the job opportunities alone in Web3 will be remarkable for engineers and others in that space.
What do you believe will be the most transformative development in Web3 over the next 5 years?
I think it's going to be engagement. Yeah. It's going to be when you look at the convergence of these technologies, when you look at AI and augmented reality and virtual reality and robotics, right? You're going to get amazing, you're just going to make amazing progress in places that are going to be really fun. Your ability to interact with, things that are important to you, whether that's, a sports team or, being able to shop at a store in an augmented reality way. The medical advances that will happen as a result of AI, and then the ability to actually carry out surgery as a result of robotics and these kinds of things. These are going to be remarkable. I think that we will solve a lot of suffering in the world as a result of the advent of these various technologies, for sure.
And they're all going to happen in 5 years or in a longer term?
It's a good question. I think that in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll start to see a lot of important pieces of infrastructure converge. So I do think that AI will be built on Sui in many instances. The ability to run robotics will be there. How long it takes to get good at that, like at scale, where effectively like every hospital is running these programs, I don't know. Maybe 5 years, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, of course. How does the Sui Foundation approach engagement with governments and regulatory bodies?
Yeah, we're actively engaged with regulatory bodies and governments in many instances. We try and make sure that we're a good partner, so that we provide our own counsel as it relates to what we think is important. There's a lot of green space there to figure out how you enable whole economies to make this leap into Web3 and do it in a way that's safe and secure, that protects people and their privacy, and important parts of an economy. So, I think as long as things stay centered on those principles, I think we're all going to be fine. And, we're engaged in that way.
Perfect. How did your experience with the capital quorum influence your approach to the crypto space?
Yeah, good question. I think anytime you're exposed to complex things like financial markets, you have an appreciation ultimately of the complexity of, the economies of the world and how things move and, how people are attached to their assets and these kinds of things. It's not a thing to take lightly. It's a real serious thing. And so this is the thing that informed me about that, is that, you've got to be careful with people and especially their assets. They've worked very hard for them.
Yeah. Having successfully exited 2 startups, what's your top piece of advice for today's entrepreneurs?
Oh, don't stop. It's important, I think, to seek advice from people who have done it and have been successful. But at the end of the day, man, I'm a big believer, you just don't stop. Put your head down, keep working, don't stop.
So basically, don't stop believing.
Don't stop.
Okay. What are the most common mistakes you see in founder-investor relationships?
Wishful thinking. I think wishful thinking is one of those things that can be really treacherous. It's easy to convince yourself into a thing and create, sort of an echo chamber for yourself. I think a lot of times it's important to make sure you're checking yourself and making sure you're just doing the right things.
What's your take on the growing trend of crypto regulations worldwide, in a broader way?
My take? I'm sure that we'll get adoption over the next 12 to 24 months. I think it'll create, again, a watershed moment for the industry, the Web3 industry in general. For us, the thing that we're doing, especially here in Turkey, is that we want to educate between 2,000 and 4,000 net new developers in Turkey. To that end, as an example, we're creating a whole scholarship program. We'll put them through a school that lasts 6 weeks, and they'll come out the other side ready to build in Web3. And of course, those jobs are very high paying. So I think the regulation ultimately allows for things like that. It allows for an economy to make the next step and be able to lead in important ways technologically.
If you could give a young blockchain developer only one sentence of advice, what would it be?
Sign up for Sui's bootcamp.
If I can ask you more than one word, what would it be?
Get creative. I mean, there's a new set of tools that are being built for the next version of the internet for Web3. Those tools are they're just undiscovered in many ways. And so there is now a set of whole toolboxes that you can be creative with. And so, these young minds that are working on these things now, they're so creative. And so I would just say, take the tools and play with them. Get used to it and experiment. The world is their oyster, and it's going to be an interesting ride over the next couple of decades.
One more question. It's going to be a bit of personal maybe, but if you could go back on time, what changes you would do, what mistakes you wouldn't repeat again?
That's a hard one for me, because I feel like the mistakes that we make are ultimately the things that shape us. So I don't know that I would want to give away any of the mistakes I've made. It's made me who I am now. So I almost hold on to those things as pearls. If you aren't making mistakes, you're not pushing hard enough. And so I think it's important to take the mistakes and make sure you look at them independently. But the hard times in life, those are the times where you make the most progress, I think.
Thank you very much for your time once again.
Yeah.
It was really amazing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. Thank you for having me.